Welcome to Ideas in Action, the official University of Southern California podcast. This show was recorded live on USC's campus.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel discussion, Misgender, Artists and Writers on Gender Today. Please silence all cell phones during this session, and personal recordings are not allowed. Please do not sit or stand in the aisles. If you need to exit or enter during a panel, please do so as discreetly as possible. In case of an earthquake, drop, cover, and hold. Do not panic and run. Await further instructions. If you see something out of the ordinary, say something to any security, fire, or staff. Okay, and now I will present them our moderator, Holly Willis.
Thank you, George. Hi, I'm Holly. I teach here in the School of Cinematic Arts in the Media Arts and Practice program, and I'm really very happy to be here with a bunch of friends and colleagues to talk about gender. So we're talking about this book, Dismiss Gender, and the title can be both a question, dismiss gender, but it's also, I think, an imperative, dismiss gender, like dismiss it. And I like that to play in the title, and I think it kind of illuminates Anne Bray, who's the instigator of the project, sitting here in the middle. Her approach is often playful, it's often layered, it's often provocative, and it's always adding to conversation. And I think as we gather here today in this room, on this campus, we could attend to another DIS word, namely discussion, and how important it is to get together, to talk, to share ideas even when they're in conflict. And I think it's, just conversation, nuance, discussion. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start, I'm going to read quickly through the bios, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll invite questions from all of you. So we'll go kind of quickly because we just have an hour. So I'm going to read bios, moving from me down the row there. I wonder why this is doing that. All right, so first, next to me is Tiffany Barber, a prize-winning, internationally recognized scholar, curator, and critic, whose writing and expert commentary appears in top-tier academic journals, popular media outlets, and award-winning documentaries. Her work spans abstraction, dance, fashion, feminism, film, and the ethics of representation, focusing on artists of the Black diaspora working in the United States and the broader Atlantic world. Her latest curatorial project, a virtual multimedia exhibition for Google Arts and Culture, examines the value of Afrofuturism in times of crisis. She is currently assistant professor of African American art at UCLA and the recipient of the Smithsonian's 2022 National Portrait Gallery Director's Essay Prize. Next, in the pink smock, is Anne Bray. Anne works at the intersection of public space and media art as a hybrid artist and as the director of LA Freewaves, a nonprofit media arts organization. Anne's mission is to engage with edgy, demanding, and clarifying art, and she is gifted in her ability to find platforms for some of our most pressing and compelling questions and subjects, invariably seeking new audiences, new perspectives, and new spaces for inquiry and provocation. She has created new forms of publishing, presented media art on city buses, projected poems at public events, and generally illuminated a long list of issues, including health, sexual violence, gender equity, and more. Dismiss Gender, which is the subject of this panel, was a large-scale conversation about gender that engaged dozens of artists, performers, and communities across 6 years. And you'll hear more about that from her in a moment. Next is Youngjun Kwok. Youngjun's art generates new, tangible forms of connection and interaction with others that go beyond traditional categories of gender and race, while vividly imagining new spaces for marginalized bodies to thrive. They are the founder of Mutant Salon, a dynamic, queer, trans femme, BIPOC collective beauty salon and collaborative art and performance platform. They also electrify audiences as a lead performer of the drag electronic dance noise band, Zena Zerner. Their work has been widely exhibited at galleries and museums internationally, including at the Hammer Museum in the biennial exhibition Made in LA 2023, Acts of Living. And their next solo exhibition is titled Resistance Pleasure and will open at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive in August 2024, with another major exhibition following at the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art in New York in 2025. And then finally, on the end is Amelia Jones. Amelia is a professor and vice dean of faculty and research in the Roski School of Art and Design here at USC, as well as a curator and scholar of contemporary art, performance, and feminist and sexuality studies. Amelia has written a long list of books. I'll just highlight a few here. Seeing Differently, A History and Theory of Identification in the Visual Arts, which she co-edited with Aaron Silver. Otherwise, Imagining Queer Feminist Art Histories, as well as a special issue of Performance Research titled On Trans Performance. And she co-edited with Andy Campbell the catalog titled Queer Communion, Ron Athey, which accompanied a retrospective of Athey's work and was listed among the best art books 2020 in the New York Times. And her 2021 book is titled In Between Subjects, Critical Genealogy of Queer Performance. And that book explores the history of performance, art, and queer theory since the 1950s from a queer feminist point of view. So as you can see, we have an amazing group here. And I'm going to direct our first question to Anne. And Anne, I wonder if you could just tell us about how the project came about and also how the book sort of became an encapsulation of the project generally.
Hello, hi. So why I wore this today, because it illustrated a lot of how the book came to be. And then there are the illustrations behind us, which are in the same order they're in the book. And all of it is sort of following the process of making the material that's in the book of Dismiss. So it started with our feminist videos that we were showing on the LA bus system. And it's because more riders on the bus are women than men. And so we had already figured out through the tech at about that time that people could text us back answers. So we asked a question on the bus, and people all over LA County were answering us. And the people were willing to really say what they thought. So it was an exciting way to start. I do see public art as a question. So all of these postcards then are the artists that we selected with the images. And I ask you to, select the one you most like, and I'll give it to you if you answer the question on the back. Right? And then I give you another copy when I get your answer, right? And we did the data analysis of it all and incorporated that into the book. And so all of the chapters are sort of the videos, then the 10 postcards and their questions informed 10 more chapters. And then we had 2 events at the LA State Historic Park. We did our Ain't I a Woman, WOMXN, question mark. And then our final, we tried Love and or Fear on Hollywood Boulevard in the midst of all the chaos of that street. And all of that became the foundation of just asking different writers here to respond to those images, to the videos that Holly did. And right from the beginning, I thought it should possibly be a book. And so we had really good photographers, taking high-res images that we saved during the whole process. And those are just, actually, they're 80 on this slideshow, and it's only a quarter of what's in the book.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Tiffany, do you want to talk about what you did for the book and how the contribution that you made kind of aligns with your larger body of work and commitments?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hand me the postcard, actually? This is a postcard by Nicole Hebron, who is a longtime self-avowed feminist artist working in LA, in Southern California. And I was familiar with Nicole's work, and Anne asked me to write on this particular postcard that really reminded me of also, and the question on the back is, how can feminism support equality? And that's communicated through the type and the text on the front of the card. But also it's a black and white image. I am a scholar of art and visual culture of the Black diaspora, so I think a lot about race and racial difference. And so black and white is like a very charged kind of combination in the work that I do. And so I was trying to think about the question of feminism and how it relates to the kind of landscape, gender equity landscape that we exist in today, and how Black feminist theory might speak back to that or expand that question. And so putting Black feminist theory in conversation with Nicole's work, but also part of my larger project, which is a book that's coming out next year on NYU Press, that is about Black women artists in the 21st century and like what are the debates and discussions around race, gender, sexuality, and class that they're intervening into with their aesthetic choices. And so I was really thinking about color theory and race, the relationship between color theory, race, gender, sexuality. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Young June, do you want to talk about your contribution and sort of how you were involved in the project generally?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Young June. Yeah, so in Ain't I a Woman and the Love and or Fear, that those were two very different projects for me. For Ain't I a Woman in the LA State Historic Park, Zena Zerner, which is my band with Marvin Astorga and myself, performed. We collaborated with Patty Chamel and Object as Subject, Paris's band, and yeah, we kind of closed out the night with a kind of like growling that turned into one really like extended scream and Marvin and collective scream.
Yeah.
You know, it started just with us, and then Marvin was kind of like adding kind of like electronic effects, adding like delay and reverb and just yeah, really and a lot of feedback. So as more people kind of joined in this collective scream after all of these gender weirdos and feminists and all of this like crazy performance art had taken place, and everybody's just yeah, and it just like kind of swelled up, and then you know, the feedback just like kind of kept on looping, and it kept on getting louder, and
Crescendo.
yeah, and then you know, and then it kind of like petered out a little bit, but then the sound continued to like resonate throughout the park, and yeah, people were like leaving and just like screaming. I know that I'll take any excuse to like scream in public. And I think by the end of the night, people were kind of joining in that spirit too. And yeah, and I think it was like a release for a lot of people. It was this like kind of like collective catharsis. A lot of people said like, you know, after the fact that, yeah, you know, it was this kind of, you know, everything from like it being like a healing moment to it just being like a nice like release and like kind of a way to cap off an otherwise like kind of, you know, a non-coherent or crazy event, carnivalesque extravaganza. And then on the Hollywood Boulevard performance, which took place outside of Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, or LACE, I had already done a like public art installation thing on their sign, on their signage outside of LACE's building on Hollywood Boulevard, like right dead center in the Walk of Fame. Like I installed a long single LED neon rope spelling out she, her, they, them, kind of, the pronouns of the space in a way. And the title of that performance was Bondage of Pronouns. And basically, I attached more LED neon rope to that single LED neon rope. And then that was another collaboration with an artist, Kim Yi, who we have like an ongoing collaboration in which she kind of plays this like mommy dearest character, like role play as like this mommy dearest character. She's also a dom in real life, so like role play is like her thing. And yeah, she like bound me up in all this like excess neon rope at night, and it was just like pooling all over the sidewalk. And the dynamic of our relationship is she's always trying to force me into becoming like a real woman, and I'm a bad baby failing. And so she like tied me up there, and she had to go to her own wedding. She was going to get married, and so she wanted so in the spaces of the neon rope, after tying me up, she left some like dollar bills, some like some little sausage francs, some bottles of water. She didn't want me to get dehydrated, and then I ended up like pissing myself at the end of the night. But but like I guess the hope was that somebody, that would like attract people to kind of engage with me, or like here, come like as like the bait or something like that. And so it was like a very like kind of social experiment too, because I was just prepared to stay out there and let whatever happen. And it was really amazing to see this like kind of collective kind of growing around me, and then kind of negotiating with me and each other, and like getting my consent to like undo the rope and kind of like bring me in. There were also other people that just like kind of ran by and like snatched dollar bills and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, the site was really significant too. I mean, like the LA LGBT Center is like right around the corner, the largest LGBT center in the world, and where I was getting healthcare at the time too. And then there are all those like shops, like wig shops, and like shops for like for like drag queens and sex workers predominantly. Yeah. But I guess both were kind of opportunities for chaos and wildness and collaboration and experimentation. So
Yeah.
You asked.
That sounds, yeah, thank you.
It's a little long.
No, that's great. And I'm just going to jump to Amelia so we hear your voice as we sort of launch this. In your essay, you talk about a series of theories of performativity and reference Judith Butler's idea that even as we perform gender, gender is performing us. Could you talk a little bit about how that concept resonates for you and how it relates to this project more broadly?
Yeah, sure. First, I wanted to say we were told if we see something out of the ordinary to say something. I thought that was especially odd in this context, but I'm not blaming the person who said that because I'm quite sure they were told they need to say that. So I'm just going to say I see a lot of things out of the ordinary, and I'm happy with that. So what led me, I think, to connecting with Anne and being invited in the first place was that I've worked for many, many years on feminist, queer, and trans issues. And at the time, you were kind of galvanizing this project, and you did part of it in the atrium here, which is another kind of crazy moment that I remember with your apron, hanging out those cards. And at that time, I was working on the book that you mentioned, Holly, In Between Subjects, A Critical Genealogy of Queer Performance, where I was like trying to read everything that's ever been written, mostly in English, but some French stuff about, with the rise of queer theory in relation to my own formation as a feminist. So that idea of gender performing us as we perform it is definitely a famous phrase that comes out of Judith Butler, but one of the points I made with the book is that she did not come up with the idea of gender as a performance. She's an extremely brilliant and important person, but those ideas had been percolating mostly among kind of cis white males, sociologists and psychologists already just after World War II, which I think is super interesting. So as a theorist but a historian, kind of, well, that's interesting. Why is that happening? And then by the late 60s, you have someone like Esther Newton as her PhD project researching transsexuals, mostly in the Bay Area, and then that gets, so all of these things get built up into that crystallizing moment around 1990 where, and my theory is kind of that the world gets ready for something and then it grasps onto a particular formation of it. But that was already percolating. And it's percolating partly because of queer and feminist artists and trans people who had the courage to do things before that. So usually the theory kind of works in tandem with the most kind of radical people who are activating new ways of being more publicly. And that's kind of all the slides we're seeing. And the Dismiss show really foregrounded how much more visible those kind of range of sexualities of gender formation have become. And we were talking on the way over here about that, how that visibility and the naming that comes along with that also then triggers the huge backlash we're seeing now and the transphobia. And that's also really present and really real. So we should also be talking about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm curious for all of you, what else is percolating at the moment that will be named at some point by theorists, or what are the ideas around gender and sexuality that are sort of prominent for you in terms of your thinking and what's happening, and what might need to be named that hasn't yet been named or kind of expanded or reimagined? Is there a particular term or language? I was reading recently, I think it was in the LA Times, about a younger generation, people between the ages of, I would say 14 and 20, having a much richer language than my generation for gender. So I'm just curious for each of you if there's something that's percolating or that's kind of compelling for you around this topic at the moment.
I've been really taken by this person, Alok, A-L-O-K. I don't know if how many of you have heard of Alok? Yeah, that they just appeared at spoke at Occidental, and then I started following them on Instagram, and they really have these beautiful nuggets that they are revealing over and over, and they have a tiny book that is in LA public libraries, and it looks like a kid book, but I thought it was really very adult-like and very useful, like great for maybe teachers. And I would say Alok is really pushing the idea of, like, if you could just drop the idea of gender, it would liberate yourself. Like that the whole culture would be liberated if you could just drop it, and I think it's pretty sticky, but I feel like that I'm really interested in all of us just forgetting about it. And the title of the book, Dismiss Gender ? It started with me really feeling dismissed myself by society in general, being an older feminist. And then by the end of the 6-year process, I really felt like, oh, no, that means that we're just going to get rid of the caring about gender. Because I feel like a whole lot of the political issues that we're all dealing with right now, that underneath them there is this whole gender level that is never recognized, or rarely recognized.
Anybody else?
Well, I think the right wing recognizes it. So, they're always very good about seeing the potential to politicize and demonize people. And so there's another way of seeing the situation, which actually, now that I've downplayed Judith Butler, is Judith Butler's new book, What is Gender?, where she argues, it sounds like the opposite, but I think it's identifying the same situation, which is the way the right wing is demonizing gender in general, so that any kind of teaching of gender or the language around gender is seen as indoctrination. So that's also something we need to be watching out for. So to say we should get rid of gender, like, I totally agree in that, kind of simple sense that Alok Vaidmanan is performing on Instagram, but at the same time, maybe we need to pay some attention to how gender's being manipulated politically.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because something that I was thinking about is the kind of one, gender as a category in which quote unquote black women are often not allowed to inhabit, particularly in this country for the last 500 years, being seen as kind of mules or commodities, not actually being able to kind of inhabit or claim the category of woman. And I think something that I'm thinking about in terms of like the futurity of this discourse maybe is how a kind of full withdrawal even from that kind of investment in a kind of category that would allow you to be conscripted into discipline as well. Like we were talking about visibility kind of making you more vulnerable. The most vulnerable among us are being made to perform vulnerability in a particular way because of this discourse around visibility, inclusion, diversity, equity, all of these things, right? And the institutionalization of that discourse. And so I'm interested in how Black female subjects are always already on the outside and what kinds of strategies they might have for how we navigate that terrain of withdrawal, of like divestment and things like that. So that's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought, yes. I mean, like, I defer to all y'all, but when I was thinking about how you were talking about like futurity too, you mentioned, and when in terms of like Alok's like project, I was thinking maybe, well, it's complicated as far as like language and terming, because like you said, like, when I was younger, I didn't have a lot of the terms to really be able to kind of assert myself as, and kind of like, I do feel like these like terms have, certain uses, but then also I think Alok's like project is maybe like not, or I think what they are doing, at least for me, isn't really destroying gender for gender's sake or destroying identity completely, but it's what it does for me. And the productive kind of thing about it is like how it presents like a speculative model, a kind of like it asks the question of what would it look like to, live in a world without gender, and I think that's important to consider, and I think that that's kind of what I strive toward too, a little bit with like my art practice too, and just, I want people to like imagine a kind of like, as much as I want trans people to feel seen, as much as I want like femmes and, non-binary people to like feel seen and heard and valued in my work, I also want us all to kind of try to imagine, different ways of like relating to each other, different ways of like belonging in groups with each other and being in community and like kind of being able to like connect intimately with others outside of these categories, that are so fraught, and yeah.
I love that. I love the way you put that. We've seen so much around the speculative recently, and the rise of not Afrofuturism, which has been sort of a long-standing tradition, but other futurisms, queer futurism, indigenous futurism. What role does the speculative play in all of this? And Youngjun, you mentioned the imagination, the ability to imagine possible futures. Does anybody want to respond to that? It's a concept.
I have been thinking a lot about this term that's not mine, but it's something that I use in my book, and it's a phrase called reproduction without futurity, and it's in conversation with and informed by queer theory, but also locating a relationship between queerness and Black female subjects that indeed, like, quote unquote Black womanhood or Black female subjecthood is actually a priori. It exists before queerness. Like, queerness can't exist without Black women being outcasted from a system that refuses to recognize them as actual humans, which is also in conversation with another professor here at USC, Zakiya Iman-Jackson's work. And so the thing about, I'm interested in, I do a lot of work with my students around kind of like taking futurity off the table, actually, as a prompt or as a mandate. I know it's hard because it's like, oh, every day, but the work that I do with Afrofuturism and the Black speculative arts movement is really thinking about the material consequences and conditions that the future on which the future happens, right? Like, we have think tanks. I mean, we're in California, right? Simi Valley and the Bay Area are like these future these just like forecasters. I mean, it's like a wild world. I asked my students the other day, I was like, did you know that space law is a thing? And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, you're late. Like, yeah. So they're just, it's like these, I try to teach them to be like, okay, what would you do if the future wasn't an option for you? And I'm thinking specifically, again, Black women organizers who are thinking about, like, how am I actually going to pay my electricity bill and not get evicted tomorrow? Like, that's my future, So I think that that we have to really kind of be considerate of the different ways that social positions enact those categories and ideas of future as well.
Anybody else? Speculative, imagination, the role of fabulation.
I would say that we're going to do another FEM event, like sort of immediately. June 22nd at LA State Historic Park, there is a full moon. There's a summer solstice and a Saturday night, and we're having a whole group of artists take over the State Historic Park, and half are installation, half are performing. They're all happening that night, and I think it'll be, again, like, what will the communalness be? So trying the idea of people coming together, the idea of belonging, of having belonging and difference coexist is my goal in life. And the feeling of that when you experience difference, that you like, oh, great. How exciting, how unboring, how interesting to get a group of people together. So that's where I'm headed.
I mean, you just made me think about how, in relation to kind of speculative futures and stuff like that, like an imagination. Myself, like, I don't think I alone, or my work imagines the future itself, but I think more it's like my kind of, I hope my work like becomes a site for other people to also kind of be involved in that like collective imagination, in any kind of like world making project or something like that. Like, and I feel like that's like a buzz kind of term. Like, I hear that a lot from my like students who are like, when I teach too, they're like making like, different kinds of like landscapes and different kinds of figures in it and stuff like that. Like, and talking about world making as a project. But for me, like, world making is necessarily collective. It's necessarily collaborative. You know, it takes place outside of just like, you know, myself. Like, I hope that like kind of it's part of a larger movement and like kind of building momentum. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to what I was going to say, which is that I'm a nerd and I'm a, like, you know, I have to have a point and I have to argue it through and I have to read all the other stuff so that I can build on that. And Anne does this crazy community building or opening the doors for exactly what you're talking about, Youngjun. So whether or not it's futurity, and I think this also goes back to gender as a performance, we're all in a space, let's say the LA Historic Part for the Ain't I a Woman Festival, and we're all interactively engaging each other in intersectional ways that, you know, maybe for a split second confirm something or maybe destabilize something. Or so that's, I think, what's wonderful about what you do is kind of creating the possibility for that. And it's an active space rather than, you know, me writing a book, which I still love to do, and I hope it's active for people reading it, but it's not that performative space, and this is what draws me to studying performance and kind of ongoingness of certain kinds of practices like yours, you know, where you're building something through. Some of the works are static, some of them are performative, some of them are performances. And so you're also creating possibilities for people to engage and find themselves possibly in slightly new ways. Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing too, is that over the 6 years that we were asking these questions, that we really saw a shift in the answers. Like, that's how quick things have been moving.
And so many of the answers contradict themselves, each other, which I think is kind of an amazing thing about these, you know, carnivalesque extravaganzas that you put together too. You know, and it's like you said, they're like glimpses, these moments where the kind of like complicated fuckery of it all, like we can still be in all of that together and somehow, you know, even for like a glimpse, a moment, you know, yeah. Yeah.
Instead of being afraid and projecting something hateful as a way of shoring ourselves up, the main thing is to create spaces where we can be with that sense of instability and be okay with it.
Oh,
like if our society could do that, just imagine how much less violence there would be.
And I'm sorry, I wanted to clarify. I meant like fuckery in the best way possible. Yeah.
We didn't think different.
The piece I wrote for the book addressed a series of video essays, or not video essays really, they were experimental videos that layered a lot of text and image and were kind of radical in form. And I was musing over the need for a new poetics to kind of communicate ideas that are new to a culture. And I think over the last 10 years, there have been different moments where different media forms, or maybe if we could look at the last 50 years and think about the role of graphic design at certain points, performance being really important in certain communities at certain points, video, immersive media. I'm wondering for you all if there's anything now in terms of the kind of coming together, whether it's being together in spaces, kind of setting aside, as you were saying, Amelia, the insecurity and just being present. What are the conditions right now that allow conversations around gender to be radical and powerful? Like, you know, is there a particular form? Is it performance? Is it media art? Is it a book? Is it all of it together? Is it the plurality of all of that together?
Oh, I think it all goes together. I mean, all of my work builds on experiencing performance and performative artwork, and, you know, it wouldn't exist without that, but it also builds on the history of theory and looking at how people have understood these things.
Yeah.
So they're all part of the same thing to me.
I could say that we were a video art festival for 20 years, and then the 2008, the economy crashed, and I had a 4-day exhibition up on Hollywood Boulevard while it was crashing, and we came out of it really thinking, I've got to shift, and always the video's been shown in public, so we started using performance art instead. And I think both video and performance are linear, so they change. You know, it's about the change that happens over both mediums, and I really feel like it helps the public to understand the work, like versus sculpture, where I feel like it's all or painting, it's concentrated in one single piece, and that you can spend your time looking at it in different angles, but it isn't broken up into changes. And it's the changes that happen that help you to understand what the artist is trying to convey. And since I appreciate the public audience, that I feel like they don't know the art history of the medium or the particular artist, so those changes really help them to cue into what is the intention of that piece. So I don't know. I've stuck with performance art right now.
I would have, if before October 7th, I would have answered this question differently, I think, in thinking that the classroom was a place where that those things might happen. But as we're seeing with all of the censorship, state-sanctioned censorship around the world, I don't know. I'm like, Discord? I don't know. I'm like, where? I'm like, I'm really interested in these kinds of like fugitive clandestine spaces, like that people don't know about. Please don't let other people know about it. Like, do your work with your people, and then like flip the table over, and we're like, holy shit, where did that come from? Great, keep that energy. You know, like I'm just like, where do you organize? Like, and we're so much invested in this conversation too. I think in this very performative, public LA Times Festival of the Book. And I'm like, oh, we're thinking output, production. And I'm really interested in like, where does the input happen? Like when you're like not even turning inward, but like, where are the spaces that we can gather that maybe we're not thinking of as safe spaces particularly, because I don't think that's actually possible in this climate. But like, are they like, okay, meet at this time, like old school, like meet at this place at this time. If you're not there, whatever, like send up a flare or something, I don't know. But like, I'm really interested in like the off the grid, out of the public eye type of space that might happen, or that we might be able to cultivate as organizers that are these kind of like micro spaces maybe that might build. I don't know. I have no answers, but I know that, yeah, the university is not it.
Yeah, I mean, or yeah, they haven't been labeled or termed or something like that yet. Maybe, I mean, what you're saying really resonates with me too. I mean, I just know though that there's some radical forms of like existing creatively in the world going on. I mean, that we're just not aware of. I mean, and it happens under pressure. It happens under struggle too, and it's happening in Gaza. You know, I'm sure. And I don't know. We need to, you know, like we can continue to talk about it later, and I think that like academics could help with that too, and but with like, you know, and in regards to like performance or video and being like linear, they do have like a weird relationship to time too, because I'm like thinking about like documentation of performances, how videos kind of take on new meanings or could be interpreted in different ways in different times and different contexts when you're viewing them and stuff like that. And so yeah, like but definitely yeah, that's what I got to say.
I'd love to hear from you all. I'm wondering if anyone has a question from the audience. Anybody?
I was hoping someone out there would define gender, and we could
Oh yeah.
it could be done and dusted. And
Any questions?
or maybe they saw something out of the ordinary.
Anything to report?
Yeah.
How do you like the photos? Right. So there are 4 photographers, right? Monica Orozco, Safi Ali Shabak, Austin Young did the studio ones, and Alexandra Sonne did the ones of the postcards. So each chapter, it does have the like an infographic about how all the people answered the question. We did illustrate one of the answers. That's it, somebody really holding it. They're the essays by artists and the essays about each postcard is incorporated in every chapter. So I sort of think the book is meant to be at your night table for a while and do it chapter by chapter because they're thematic. And then it's supposed to go out on the coffee table for you to share with all of your friends.
To go back to that question that you asked before about like that I'm interpreting like as like what's the right discipline or like what's the next hot thing or something like that. I will just say like for me, you know, like working in different mediums, like in different disciplines with their own histories, like sculpture and performance, they're so related for me just in terms of like bodies and space and stuff like that. But then they also do very different things for different audiences, and they feed me in very different ways too. You know, and it allows me to kind of be in conversation with different people. Like, for instance, you know, performance for me is like where I get to really, like my body, I get to interface very directly with somebody else. And, you know, there's this like friction that happens and it's being negotiated in real time. Whereas like my sculptures, that's like also, you know, my gallery work, the things that are like in museum galleries and are like more clean and presented and stuff like that is like a way for me to, and like my community to interface with people that otherwise I would never encounter, you know, that maybe might see me or like other people like in the distance on the street and then like, or, you know, kind of approaching a Mutant Salon or Zena Zerner, just be like, wait, too weird for me. And then like turn away, you know, I'm able to interface with them in that way, you know, like other people and kind of, you know, they operate on different levels too. You know, the sculpture kind of like, I think about like materiality and the materials kind of making the the viewers performers in a way. And like kind of, you know, like I use a lot of like glittery rhinestones and stuff like that. And I think about this process of disorientation and reorientation, whereby which like people find themselves, you know, viewers in this like kind of like, oh shit, I'm in this space of transness in a way, or like I am closer and really kind of like engaging in a kind of careful and intimate looking and like being with these trans bodies and for a prolonged period of time, more than they would ever, you know, in their daily lives. And so long donged up way of like saying that, you know, different mediums do different things, but I don't privilege one over the other necessarily. And they're all kind of in conversation with different things. Like right now, you know, I'm going to take some of these conversations, like things that y'all have said and like, you know, with me, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully with y'all too. I mean, you know, we can all be artists and, you know, we're like kind of doing different things, but in conversation.
I love that idea of orientation, disorientation as a possible tactic for sort of bringing people in, shifting a way of thinking, and then having a new way, a new worldview come forward. I wonder if any of you have other sort of sets of tactics that you think about. I mean, you've mentioned a couple already, but these ways of kind of engaging people, helping shift thinking, into new directions, tactics or strategies that work.
Abstention. I had this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, actually. In the political context, I used to be a student organizer when I was in college, and I was also a dancer, and so I think a lot about the body in space as well. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm like, we have very real limitations, like our bodies, like facility-wise, like unless you're training it, like you're gonna have some limitations, right? And so I think very much about that kind of real barrier. And then I've more recently been thinking about abstention and how abstention gets kind of regulated to the margins of like the political process. Like, oh, it's not an option. I'm like, what? I'm like, actually, abstention can be very powerful. And I actually had a colleague who like tried to like discipline some of the folks in my department. Like, you can't use this. And I was like, well, why is it there as an option if we can't use it? But like people get really freaked out. I'm like, abstention is not even that radical. It's just like, okay, you're just kind of registering. You can register a lot of things with abstention, but it's something that's a tactic that I've been. If you're not ready to be like balls to the wall, cool. You can abstain. Just abstain. It will save us a lot of like. It's a powerful thing. So anyway, I've been thinking about that as a tactic.
That worries me a little bit, just because we're in such a volatile moment, like on the bigger political stage. But yeah, I think in those micro moments, absolutely, where you're in contact with everyone in the room.
I mean, what would be what are the alternatives that you feel like are actionable?
Well, this is a bit of a tangent from that, but I do think teaching in an art school, even in this neoliberal environment, I do feel more hopeful, because I feel really honored to be teaching artists and designers who are, they're sometimes they're very market oriented, but mostly they're there to ask questions about how can I make things, where should I make them, what should I make them with, what should I be saying? And to me, those are really exciting kind of core questions that we can step back before that and talk about what the structures are that define this thing that you've decided you're going to make, and take apart the deep neo-colonial, colonial histories of those disciplines, including art, including design. And then the point is not to break them down into an abject heap of despair, but rather to, by the end of our curriculum, is kind of to empower them so that they know what they're getting into. Because one of the problems with the way all these institutions work is they want to hide or gloss over the mechanics, which are usually driven by branding and capital and, all these things that ultimately, on the one hand, seem to allow any kinds of identification and embrace it as long as it improves the branding. But on the other hand, the dark side of that we're seeing right now with the silencing of freedom of speech on campus, because the minute the expression on a campus is viewed as potentially damaging the branding, all the forces come into play to cancel that kind of speech. And so, on the one hand, optimism, but on the other hand, I think we're in a very dangerous moment on campuses. So I agree with you, Tiffany, on that.
I was just gonna say that, I mean, like, abstaining from one world, or like kind of, resisting or refusing to participate in one world doesn't mean that, you're not engaging with your own culture otherwise. I think about like, I think about that moment when like Trump got elected, and then like I think a lot of like a larger population of women, for example, like, and including like white women, are like, I need to leave, I need to get out of here, or whatever. I don't know how I can participate in politics anymore. I've like lost all belief or faith in the political system or something like that. Whereas for, I knew a lot of people, like a lot of like like poor BIPOC folks, like artists, like people that I know punks who've just been like, it's been like this, you're just realizing this now, and so, but that's not to say that, they're not creating each other's, we are creating worlds for each other already, and it's I think that like that kind of like local engagement, this like communal collaborative engagement where we're doing things for each other and creating our own culture is like and that kind of sustainability without like having to participate, withdrawing from like a kind of like patriarchal engagement that's like demanded of us, as citizens, and political engagement and stuff like that. So that's
Right. So, all right. So we're going ahead with our masculinity project, which we started last year. Spella was involved in, and it was, I have to say, it was really difficult. Artists were not saying they work with masculinity. Audience showed up less for that topic. It seemed like the only discourse was toxic masculinity, which turned everyone off. They were like, bored, I hate that. I'm not doing it. And I was like, this totally reminds me of the early days of feminism, where the discourse was so simple. It was just sort of anger or not anger, like you're noticing it or you're not noticing it. And I just feel like the masculinities, we've been using plural, and just hoping that all these different plans that we're going to try to approach different publics in different ways, different mediums, to see if we can make some progress in that one area.
Cool. One last chance for any questions? Okay.
So you asked about the what mode, right? How are they going to learn? And as a mom of a trans child, I have been so happy to see that gaming has been a huge step forward, or whatever you want to call it. But the D&D and role playing and being able to go beyond boundaries and with other kids, not just locally, but they have groups with kids from Minnesota and Texas that they're talking about these issues, and they're coming to me and they're asking, what do you think about this? And I'm learning, and a lot of times I'm stumped. I'm not quite sure all the time how to respond. But I love just seeing that's, even though social media scares me sometimes, mine's only 14, so, you want to limit that a little bit. But on the other hand, that's how they learn. They're learning from other people, so that I see like the Discord, like you had mentioned, these Discords for these groups and these gaming, and even that extends, to online, other games. Even though I know it scares some people, it's a huge benefit and it's a huge support system for them. And it's, anyway, it's just something that I'm seeing growing. And especially because I'm I homeschool, so we have our own, subculture, I guess you could say. But it's in California, it's extremely supportive. And more kids are coming to the homeschool community because they're not feeling, welcome in the schools or whatever. And so the homeschool community is like, it's a haven, right? And I love seeing the acceptance and the experimentation and the discussion but I just think as far as that method, again, it's like allowing these kids to role play and experiment and talk and discuss without adults necessarily, and then to come to the adults when they want more help or support or questions or whatever. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's great. Thank you so much for that addition. It was really powerful.
Yeah, thanks. for saying that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And gaming as a site is super very complex and like totally a part of also people's studies. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And these kinds of, I love the homeschool community. I love that there are a number of other folks in my community who also have been doing that to homeschool their children and kind of create these spaces again that are like not a part of the mainstream, and they're not like publicizing it. They're just like kind of like very word of mouth, very like grassroots, and it's just like they're just operating under the radar, which is really, really wonderful.
And also,
Well, I'm a little worried about homeschooling because it's not creating, live space communities of kids learning to deal with each other. So, well, I'm just saying it's a complicated situation. I think there's more sides to that.
I love that you brought that up though too, and it made me like, it really like kind of warmed my heart that you were kind of seeing your child's like involvement like virtually, like kind of validating that. I think that a lot of like trans people, a lot of like people marginalized groups, like like somebody who lives in the middle of nowhere, where they don't feel seen, they don't have a community, can find others in like online spaces, and they can really like, it is a valid way of like kind of still being in one's body and engaging in community and kind of like so thanks for recognizing that, and for your child too.
Yes, thank you. And I think ending on that note of positivity and communion and community is a nice recognition of this project and of Anne's work for many years, putting it together, creating this book, bringing us all together. So thank you, Anne, very much. And thank you all for coming to our panel. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and visit us at podcast.usc.edu.